We're back.
Yes, we are back again with Layer 1.
Yeah, we're on a grind recently.
Yes, we really are.
We're doing
Finally,
pretty solid.
we're here to stay, hopefully, maybe.
Well, unless the serpent or the committee or the demons or whatever gets us,
Yeah,
all,
that's
all the
still
various
pending.
entities we've angered.
Still pending, and there's only going to be more that will be angering with any future
Oh yeah,
episodes, probably.
yeah, 100%.
But yes, the topic that we are doing today, for any of you true gamers out there, and by true gamers, we're talking like OG stuff. Uh, the infamous Polybius arcade game.
Yes, a very classic. Gosh, what would you even call it? Because it's like it precedes creepypastas. There's
It's
kind of unfiction elements to it. Again,
yeah,
before that was even really a term. It, it's
it
it's
really is just like urban legend, like just like the
yeah,
original form. Just but arguably, yeah, you could say it's looking back at it with how what we've what's come to light and other things. It could be seen more as unfiction, ARG kind of, but
it kind of blurs the line between all those things because it's kind of a forerunner to all those things,
yeah,
right? Yeah, it is. If you want to give it, if you want to designate it, kind of most accurately, an a internet urban legend. Kind of one of the first, really.
yeah.
The first, of course, though, was, as we've talked about in a previous episode. Go watch it. Ong's Hat. Go watch that episode. It's a good episode.
Yes.
It's approved by the creator of Ong's Hat himself. So just saying.
Yes. Shout out to Joseph Matheny. You're a real
Yeah,
one.
yeah. But yeah, so Polybius, obviously not as elaborate, not as crazy as Ong's Hat, but a lot more impactful, right? A lot more um well, maybe that's the wrong word. A lot more pervasive. Yeah, that's probably the
Pervasive.
word.
Yeah. Well,
Eh,
it
kind
is. Yeah, it is. Well, because it is impactful because it's something that's made its way into like like
yeah, that's right.
super popular media.
Yeah,
Like
like
some,
people know about Polybius.
yeah, like there's a couple. There's lots of examples where they've shown it in shows or various things like that. Because
Yeah.
yeah, I know there was an instance in The Simpsons where they had a Polybius
Yes.
cabinet in the background, and
Yeah.
I heard I didn't finish the show, so I didn't actually see it, but I heard in the most recent season of Loki, he has a Polybius cabinet also.
Oh, really?
Apparently, yeah. I
That's
didn't know
that's
this, but
cool. That's kind of funny.
that's pretty fun. That's pretty silly.
Yeah, that's neat. I like that. Rare Disney W.
So it's like it's made its way into like even Disney knows some things apparently.
Yeah. 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 So it has made its way. It is kind of a part of pop culture, right? I mean, fucking angry video game nerd made a video on it. There's that really great Ahoy video on YouTube that has like millions of views. Go watch that, by the way. I really recommend that like investigative documentary
Yes.
he made. Um and it's showed up in The Simpsons, fucking Loki. Like it's a part of pop culture now. I would say. And it has been. I think, right? It has been. I remember um I remember being a kid, and like a little kid in elementary school and knowing about Polybius, right? Like
Yeah.
me and my friends would talk about it. We heard about it from, one of the older kids, or, we heard about it while we were in the computer lab, and we went on the old forums from the 2000s, right? We go on those old gaming forums. Hey, have you guys heard about this game Polybius, right? And I distinctly remember every time we'd go somewhere where like a laundromat or a pizza place where they had arcade machines, there would always be, they're like, oh, maybe it's here,
You will
in the back of
find
your
one.
head. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Because it's just this neat little story, this neat little urban legend that, you know, everyone knows about and at least I have known about for a while. And I think a lot of
yeah.
people of my generation
I
have
mean,
too.
I've known it for a long time too, but from a different angle. Actually, it wasn't from that. It wasn't like oh,
Was it
maybe we'll.
schoolyard rumors?
It wasn't exactly that. No, it was more of the talks about Men in Black stuff. Before
Hmm.
child me knew about a certain MK Ultra. So it was more the
Gotta
funny.
do an episode on that, by the
Yes,
way.
of course, that's a whole other thing. But
Yeah, it'll be a long while before
yeah,
we can compile all the research for
yeah,
that.
there's a lot needed, but it was from like that angle. It was from like the spooky Men in Black,
Right.
and like so that was where I heard about it from. Was like, oh yeah, this spooky experimental arcade cabinet that made people sick or crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's because I heard about it, from it came into it from a gaming angle, right? Because that's
Mhm.
what kids are all interested
Oh yeah.
in, and that's kind of what it's capitalizing on, right? As a story
Oh, of course, yeah.
is this like rare, obscure kind of game angle, but like it juices it up by not just being rare and obscure. It has that whole aspect of Men in Black and MK Ultra, mind control. It makes you kill yourself. All this crazy stuff surrounding this game. It's super appealing. It's super. This was a time when and you would often find it talked about in the same kind of circles on the internet as like those old rumors and like fake um legends about like, oh, if you go to the truck in Vermilion City in Pokemon Red and Blue, you can find Mew under the truck, if you do the right like buttons or like Mew 3, all this dumb shit that dumb kids believe, right?
Yeah.
um so that's how I found it, right? Is because it was the same kind of like sketchy fake websites that had that stuff on it had Polybius too. Um, alongside other kind of like actual kind of obscure old interesting games like Sword Quest or um, stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's always been it's kind of crazy thinking about it how old of an urban legend it is now, right? Because uh, I mean, I first heard about it in like 2005, right, as a
Mhm.
kid, a little kid. But I know the original coin op page says 98, but I think evidence kind of hints that the page was actually created in like 2000, 2001.
Mhm. Right.
That's still a long time ago now, right?
Yeah.
That's over 20 years, which is crazy to think about, right? That's how it is still going, right? Like it's still showing up in Loki seasons, right? It's
Yeah.
still
And
it's
on
it's
that end,
hilarious.
it's, a funny reference or joke, but then there's definitely still people out there who still believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Again,
still like,
it has that Ong's hat thing going
yes,
with it, right? Where there is
exactly.
still the people who are like, nah, dude, I remember in the '80s, man, in Portland, I remember seeing this black arcade cabinet with, all it had was the letters Polybius on the marquee. That's it. And you still have, yeah, you still have the occasional person who's like, no, the Polybius is real. It's legit. It actually existed. Which is interesting, right? Because and
Yeah.
that's why I like these old early kind of forerunners to modern stuff like unfiction or creepypastas or whatever, because
Yeah.
there's
It's that.
that element of believability
Yeah,
back then.
exactly. The believability and the whole, you know, a lot of things nowadays, everyone they take the credit for it. Like the creators take the credit. Like they just
Yes.
come out and be like, ah, yes, this is, or you're watching a YouTube video or all these things. It's almost perfect, and then the credits roll, and it's like, ah, yes,
You're
this
like,
is my art
no.
project, and it's like, ah, no, this is almost perfect. This was almost like believable. This is some like weird spooky thing, and it's like, I get
Yeah.
it. You want the exposure, and it's fun and stuff, but it's like,
Yeah.
what? It will permeate through time, and like there'll be
Yeah.
people who still believe in like 20, 30 years in the future, even more.
Yeah, exactly. 'Cause like, yes, like you said, it's understandable, right? If you make something, if you put all this effort and care and love into a project, like I understand wanting credit for that, right? And I don't think anyone besmirches someone for wanting credit and maybe like linking to a Patreon or something,
Yeah.
right? Like to get something out of it. Like that's completely understandable. So I don't begrudge people, but it does sap the magic out of it.
Yes.
That's the problem I have, right? Is it's understandable, but like once you make it, once you do that, you don't make like it's not you make it into content, right? It's not urban legend material anymore because we know it's fake.
Hmm.
We know it's created by someone. It outright says it. So
Yeah.
like as much as I love a lot of this stuff, a lot of this like analog horror, like digital horror, just video, you know, series on YouTube. I love a lot of these. I do wonder to myself, are people going to like really remember and talk about these, 20 years from now?
Yeah.
Um,
Because at that point, it's
uh,
just a fun art project someone did, and
yeah,
yeah, it had its impact at the time. Either they end it and it's a fun memory, or they just keep milking it, and happens a lot too. It's just like, I guess I'll
yeah,
just keep making more of this thing. It's like, oh, there's the other bit of like, it's also fun where it happens, like you create it, but it goes so far where you can come out and say you made it later, and people just won't believe you.
yeah. As
Like,
as we talked about in the Long
yes,
Sad episode.
exactly. Yeah, the perfect example of like it took a life of its
Of like,
own, and then you're like, you try and like be like, hey, that's me, that's my thing, and just people are just like, no, you're a lie.
it's like that's you were they made you say that, didn't they? Yeah,
Wrong sad
exactly.
is
That
real.
Yeah, those kind of people, exactly. Um, which yeah, that can be a major downside. But again, I think there's something about that magical like spot in between where it's like, yeah, obviously you like rationally consciously know that it's bullshit, right?
Mhm.
But like because there's no credits, there's no Patreon link, there's none of that. And there's no made by such and such. Like you're almost kind of, you know, you can suspend your disbelief.
Yeah.
And almost feel like it's real, like it's actually happening, and that's a really powerful feeling.
Yep.
Like people, they when I think of like old like YouTube horror like urban legend videos, right? I think of like the angel video, the fallen angel in Spain video. That
Nice.
I know for a fact there's people who still believe that's a completely real video. Or the I have a body of a pig ghost sighting video.
Mhm.
Again, I know plenty of people who just totally believe that was like a legit like s- ghost recording. Um, so like those are still talked about. People still believe in them to this day, right? And they're even when it came out later, like the creators come out and say, yeah, it's fake. This is like CG or like just dicking around in After Effects
Mhm.
because that's not in the videos themselves and it's not even in the like description or comments. The channel, there's nothing on the channel to indicate that it's fake. it feels real, right?
Yeah.
And so the legend can spread. It can become legendary. It can become this kind of it can gain this kind of mythical status that you don't get with a lot of the modern stuff. As much as I do understand the impulse to want credit and potentially even money for your projects. I don't blame people in the slightest, but I do grieve the loss of that magic. You see that with the fact that like ARGs really aren't really a thing anymore. Like ARGs proper, I would say.
Right. Yeah.
Um, you don't see stuff like the old ARGs anymore because again, you can't have an ARG. I mean, the whole point of the ARG is that it's a story like LARPing as being real, basically,
Yeah.
quite literally. Um, and so by definition, you can't do that while like admitting it's fake and having credits and stuff,
Yeah.
which really sucks because some of those ARGs, and it's partially that, it's partially other reasons, right? Why ARGs have kind of been dying. It's partially because um companies don't want to do that anymore because people forget that a large part of what drove early ARGs was like big companies making them, right? You think of like the I Love Bees Halo ARG, or um,
Overfield
the
one.
the Cloverfield ARG, the Dark Knight ARG, the Beast,
Or which project?
the ARG for AI. Um, so yeah, there was a lot of capital going into the early ARG sphere, which is
Yeah.
really really cool, really neat, and there's a lot of cool experiences um because of that, but because it, on one hand I couldn't understand it, right? Because it's a risk, right?
Yeah.
It's a big risk for especially nowadays when like you can be held liable for anything that happens during these ARGs, during these like quests basically.
Yeah.
Um so companies don't want to deal with that because you just get massive problems. I mean, I think the the um a big example recently, I think recently-ish, was the whole thing where Matt Pat from the Game Theorist had to like make a whole video about like, hey guys, don't like, because the like Five Nights at Freddy's game theory like fandom like thought they had found an ARG, but they were completely they were seeing not like there was nothing there, right? There wasn't
Yeah.
an ARG. They were just kind of being schizophrenic and making connections that weren't really there, and they ended up harassing like this poor little business in the middle of nowhere. And like NetPat had to like be like, "Hey guys, stop doing that." You like, he had to apologize and do like a whole like, "Here's how to play ARGs, kids." Like,
Hmm.
right? So there's this whole pushback. There's this whole blowback. For something that he didn't even really do, right? I don't
Yeah.
think you can really blame MatPat like for what happened because it's like how the hell was he supposed to know that like that was gonna happen, right? Like how the hell?
Yeah. That your some crazy fans connected some non-existent dots, and it just escalated. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
um, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was a whole crazy situation, and it's just like, man, he didn't even like do anything, and it's not really his fault, but like imagine you're like a company, right? Like a big company, like some game company or movie studio, right? And you could get sued, you could all this together. So it's just a hassle. But it's a massive potential hassle um, that could happen. So I can see why companies kind of um, why they stopped doing that. because it's yeah.
Yeah,
But
and like you see that a lot too with any of these like lost media hunts and things like that, like any of those kind of videos, or you know, our FBI or whatever, that Reddit thing about just
oh yeah, yeah.
uncovering things. Of everyone nowadays, everyone has to put all these caveats of not harassing the people involved because, you know, now the internet's just, there's just so many people compared to back then, like the older days, where it's
There's
just like there's way more crazy people that are gonna come across this and like
there's
harass these
yeah.
poor, people who, it's like, oh yeah, this mysterious song or these other things, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna start harassing these random like artists and musicians and directors and
Yeah, yeah. The issue, part of the reason why I don't blame MatPat for what happened is because like people were like, I saw a lot of people say like, oh, well, like what did you expect a bunch of kids to do? And I'm like, I remember playing ARGs as a kid, and I never did stuff like that, right?
yeah,
I was never like that. I didn't need to. I didn't even need to be told the rules of how to play ARGs because I just intuited them. Um, so like I don't think that's an excuse for what people do, especially because it's not just kids. Like it'll be grown ass adults too, right? Who do this
oh yeah,
shit.
of course,
So it's like I think the issue is that yeah, the internet got opened up to the normies, and I think it's clear in recent years, right? It's not just in regards to ARGs, unfiction in general, but like just kind of the weird the weird kind of pseudo reality that the internet creates, that a lot of normies not are a lot of normies just aren't equipped to handle that, right?
yeah,
They have a hard time. A surprising amount of normies have a hard time with this whole, like boundary between reality and fiction thing.
yeah,
Um, that the original netizens didn't have a problem with. Well, mostly didn't have a
yeah. For the
problem
most
with.
part, of course, there's a
Like,
handful of outliers, but
yes, of course you got Angsat and stuff, but like
yeah,
even then it could be said Angsat happened the way it did because of the Eternal Summer, right? Of
mhm,
1993, when the internet um really first went live. Obviously the internet existed before that, but you when like that was when like the internet as we know it first really started to be formed.
yeah,
And so
and of course,
instead
yeah,
of yeah,
the
so
yeah, being so early, of course, there will be the people who did get a little too sucked in and like blinded by, you know, the blurry lines.
yeah, yeah, it's something that's hard for people again yeah, for people when they first come across it. It's difficult to really like understand how to like it's difficult to process it, right?
Mhm.
It's really hard for people to really grasp kind of um how I say it is that when you break down the boundary between reality and fiction, that to a lot of people also kind of it again it's as we talked about in the Philip K. Dick episode, it's the Chapel Perilous, right?
Yes.
You break down people's sense of reality and people's kind of social conduct. Like you break down their understanding of social conduct within that space within the Chapel Perilous, and so you get people doing weird things that they wouldn't otherwise normally do because they don't know how to handle the Chapel Perilous.
Yeah.
They don't know how to handle the space between fiction and reality. It's difficult for them, and we see that in a lot of ways. Now where we have to have videos like Matt Pats, we have to make you know, if we make posts about weird little mysteries and investigations into them, we have to like make, big old signposts saying, "Hey, don't like harass people," because people just now that the internet's open up to everyone and it's full of normies and they just don't all these people who just don't get it, like you have to have that because they'll get weird, right? If you get weird, they get weird, and just but
Yeah,
they don't know how to be weird.
exactly.
We
Yeah, they
do.
don't.
We know how to be weird, right? Because
Yeah,
we've been weird forever, so we know how to be weird and also like have a normal one at the same time, as the kids would say.
yeah.
Um,
I know. Like you said, it it messes with boundaries, just even in the simpler term of like interacting with other people. Like they'll start
yeah,
treating
yeah,
people in real life like people on the net, and or vice versa, and then it's just
it gets weird,
and it
and
gets
and this
way
doesn't
too weird. Yeah,
and this doesn't just apply to ARGs and unfiction. ARGs and unfiction are just kind of a microcosm, really, of this kind of like super chapel perilous that the internet kind of has put all of society in, right? It's something that's seeped into almost every aspect of life at this point. There's like the boundaries between reality and fiction aren't just broken and kind of fuzzy and blurry when it in unfiction and ARGs. That's just where it's most obvious. But like
mhm.
you get it in the social realm, the political realm, I think also pretty obviously. It's just every aspect of everywhere because of the internet. You get people. That's why people are just so fucking weird and crazy these days, right? I think
Yeah,
that's a big aspect of it. Is people just don't know what's real and what's fake anymore, and so they get their understanding of how to properly, they're disoriented, so their understanding of how to properly, conduct themselves kind of flies out along with reality itself.
yeah, exactly. And
Um,
the consequences of certain people of being terminally online, many who
oh
can't
yeah,
handle that but still are, and just absolutely lose it.
oh yeah, it's absolutely just nightmarish, right? It's
Yeah,
just it's had disastrous effects. And so yeah, it's just one of those things that's uh you know as we said in episode before the last episode, serpent moment.
it's truly a serpent moment. Yeah,
The internet is a tool of the serpent. uh Facts. And that this
fact
is what it
checked,
what it
true
does.
and real.
Yeah. Yeah, this is what it does, this is what it causes. um so yeah, I mean, I guess getting back to Polybius itself, we've kind of strayed a bit from it, but that's fine. We do that a lot. We
Yeah, but it's
Again, if you want to hear the straight facts and details, you can go to Ahoy's video
yeah.
or
Or Y Files even did
Angry
one
Video.
too, and
Yeah, yeah, Angry Video Game Nerd. Everyone's done a video on Polybius, and they're all
yeah,
great. For Frank, they're really good. But you know, if y- what we've been talking about so far, we've kind of talked about it before.
yeah,
Again, we bring up Ong's Hat episode, the Philip K. Dick episode, the Cult of Boitada episode. Um, but I think when it comes to Polybius itself, it's such a great case study, an early case study, much like Ong's Hat of this kind of thing, this kind of process. Um, but I think what's particularly interesting with Polybius as a story, as a concept, right, is I would say that in a way, it's kind of an analog horror predecessor too. Um, or I guess analog horror. I say analog horror because everyone knows what analog horror is, right?
yeah, right.
But I guess the better term that I think people should use more, because a lot of stuff gets lumped into analog horror, or digital horror is another term that's been coming up. Um, I high key think they kind of suck as terms. I think a better term would be something like nostalgia horror,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
And in
that's
that, when you
oh yeah.
when you use that term, you can suddenly see how Polybius is the predecessor to those. Because what Polybius has that Ong's hat doesn't, that our Philip K. Dick episode doesn't. Any of these other episodes that we've talked about these kind of things, I think we even kind of talk about it in we talk about it in the Anonymous Code podcast too, in that episode. But what it has is the element of nostalgia, right? It has, the whole thing centers around an arcade cabinet. I mean, I don't like,
Yeah. No, it
and
sets
you in
such a vibe that so many people like, you know, either know personally or just experience it through movies or just aesthetic posts
yeah,
people make or things
yeah.
like that. Of just that atmosphere of being in an arcade in the 80s.
Oh, so good.
It's
Like
just
I can see it in my head, like
yeah, yeah.
vividly, right? This classic arcade, it's the 80s, and then there's like all these arcade games, fucking Space Invaders, Galaga, but then just tucked away in the corner in the back, barely lit by the neon lights, there's Polybius, right? I can see it in my head.
Yeah.
And so that nostalgic vibe, I think, is something that's so key to Polybius as a story, and that's, I think, plays a subconsciously big role in its how it became a thing, how it became so popular, and why it's stuck with us, stuck in the public consciousness for so long now.
Yeah, and to the point of now we've got people, well, it's been going on for ages, but people making their own Polybius cabinets in real life just to like
Yeah,
just to know what it was like to feel that vibe, I guess. And
yeah,
the
yeah,
and of course, because of the story and the urban legend itself, there's that sense of like that insanely ominous aura when you picture
mhm,
that in your head. Like you were saying, like, oh, you picture the little black cabinet in the back of the arcade, just
mhm.
pretty dim. But then it's just the vibe from it because like the story of Men in Black.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
That's
psyops and like all this like mind control stuff, and you know, leading to violence and people disappearing apparently and things like that too.
yeah,
Such a good like, yeah, it's just perfect. It's just synthesized Kino.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that's why I say it's a predecessor to nostalgia horror, nostalgic horror, because it has that. It's like pure condensed version of what the appeal of nostalgia horror is, which is it simultaneously takes you back to your childhood, to a better time where you were more innocent and things were just better and were more fun and cool and interesting, but it also kind of undermines that, right? Because the nostalgic horror, what it does is it takes you back to that time, but it also says there was there were things going on that you weren't aware of. There was a dark underbelly to your past that you didn't notice, that you weren't capable of comprehending, let alone seeing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um and I think that's a big appeal, for reasons that are kind of, at least personally, they're kind of difficult to explain, right? Like, why is that so appealing? I'd have to say that I think a big aspect of it is it has a lot to do with things sucking so bad now.
Yeah,
Because if you realize that, like, there was a dark underbelly back then, you kind of have this whole there's this aspect where you feel it, like that answers things, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like you look back and it's just like, ah, it explains a lot.
exactly. It explains things. It kind of subconsciously explains how we got to today, right? Like
Yeah.
it explains things, the state of things now. Um, but it's this interesting paradox too, because it still does seem better than now. Even if there was a dark underbelly to the world back then, like you can still you can still acknowledge that, like, well, it still was fun and interesting and cool, and things in a certain sense, in a lot of ways, were better, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's why analog horror is so appealing, because again, it's horror, but it still appeals to the aesthetic sense. And so in that, it's beautiful, right? Because it's using the aesthetics of a better time, of just an objectively beautiful, like, look, even if kind of only in retrospect, right?
Yeah.
While also kind of providing an answer to why things just are so bleak today.
Yeah, no, because it
Um,
does do that. It paints that image of this, like, yeah, talking about the dark underbelly of like there's a parallel thing that's been going on for a long time. Like while we're here, like we're the kids playing the arcades, there's always been that. There's always been that other side that's been running just as long or longer. That just adds
yeah,
to the, I don't know, dread or just something like just some like off feeling that,
yeah,
oh, while you've been, while you've been a kid growing up playing games, on your computer and stuff, there's the people who, like in this example of Polybius, it's like there's the ones who made Polybius. There's like,
yeah,
they're out there, like that idea of like that's been running just as long. It's been 43 years since supposedly Polybius was out there, out in Oregon,
yeah, yeah,
in those arcade cabinets. And it's just like to think of like what they were doing then, that's
yeah,
still going 43 years later, of
yeah,
what level, like what, where that, research or
yeah,
observations, what they learned from that, because they must have learned something. The game came and went, and story spread.
yeah. I think that's what makes Polybius such a masterwork. Um, and like what makes it, I think, the key predecessor to nostalgia horror is because the story of Polybius is itself almost kind of, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like it's almost kind of a meta commentary on that feeling of that you get from nostalgia horror itself, right? Because the whole thing is it references like MK Ultra type stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that was real. MK Ultra was like, that stuff was real, like c- conspiracy, brainwash, drugging stuff, right? And so when that stuff would have been that stuff came out in the late 70s, right? But I imagine, so imagine um and because you know, we found out, of course, that it had been happening since like the late 40s, early 50s, or was
Yeah.
it like mid 50s? It's for a while now.
Yeah, it's definitely like
For a
post
while.
World War II, like
Yeah.
precursors in Japan, and then obviously the Soviet
Well,
Union
but
doing their own thing, which boosted, like the other
yeah,
sides.
but the point that I'm getting at there, though,
Mm,
is that like when you think of like the 50s and stuff, like there is this like idyllic image to it. Um, Even at the time, right?
yeah,
So imagine you're someone who was a kid in the 50s, and then, you know, by the 70s, when MK Ultra, gets leaked, And like that, they had that generation would have had that feeling of nostalgia horror, but like for real in real life.
Yes.
The realizing all these horrific experiments were going on and being conducted by a government they fully trusted, like in the shadows, in the background of their childhood the whole time.
Yeah, no, it's that whole yeah, no, just that added weight too of like yeah, no, like what you're painting of the 50s of that, you think of the like the atomic like nuclear family like that view and like they just won World War II and it's like
Yeah,
everything's perfect. And then it's
yeah,
just like no, they just got right to it and like that had been
yeah,
going on the entire time and
yeah. When you think of the 50s, you think of, the white picket fence, affordable homes, you know, uh, one income family, two kids, a dog, lovely wife, husband with a good job. You think of a relatively nice time, and then to, to have been that generation experiencing that and to have that view, and then have that view crushed when you're an adult in the 70s with the reveals of MK Ultra and just what the government is capable of, what it's done, what it could do, what it could still be doing. Um, and so, of course, I think a story, a legend like Polybius was almost kind of like just guaranteed to happen, right? Of course, someone later on in time was going to take that feeling.
shift up the timeline.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, someone was going to take that feeling, take kind of the lore and that feeling, and mix them together and make something amazing out of them.
Yeah.
Just, which is what Polybius is. That's what Polybius is. Um, so I mean, yeah, it's just this perfect storm of ideas of this game that brainwashes you. It makes you have like seizures and heart attacks, makes you want to kill yourself or get violent, and stories of men in black showing up and taking away the cabinets or doing weird things with them in the back, or making strange screens show up, strange inputs, all these things. In this place that again the arcade is like the another it's the perfect example of this particular space in a particular time, when people back then when they were kids, right? Like the arcade was the place to be. It was excellent. It was nothing but fun times, cool experiences, hanging out with your friends, getting up to whatever, playing games, like incredible, amazing games, getting into competitions. It was a virtual playground. It was a great place to be. I personally would love to have grown up with those art school arcades. I wish they were still around today. I would love to experience them as an adult even. But again, imagine for people who grew up during that time when they look back on them, it's just a magical place.
Yeah.
So when you add the story of Polybius, like, oh, this kind of distortion, it makes the arcade even more interesting because you're like, well, wait a minute, you know, like what was going on in the
Mhm.
background of me just having fun with my friends, eating pizza, drinking soda at the arcade. What were the dark forces there that I missed the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And especially because a lot of aspects of the Polybius myth are kind of true,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
No, a lot of that,
Kind
a
of
lot
true.
of little things. There were odd things happening in Portland at the time. There were a couple guys who did get sick or ill at arcades. Now, like within quick succession, there was but those obviously since then there's been explanations that have come forth. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
this one guy was trying to break a record, and obviously playing an arcade game for 28 hours straight would make you sick.
yeah,
Or another guy who just happened to like have a seizure or something, because it's like, oh yeah,
yeah,
this guy just happened to have epilepsy and should not have been in an arcade.
yeah.
And
It, and
it's like little
those
things, but it's like it all got co-opted into this,
yeah.
this
There,
great story.
there would be times where servicemen would come in and mess with the arcades, and they would be strange. They would make strange inputs that kids wouldn't. And that's the key thing, right? Is that all these explanations were all there from the beginning. It wasn't something that they weren't things that were found out
Mhm.
later, right? Like obviously, if a kid starts getting all, starts tweaking out, he's probably having like an epileptic seizure, right? That's just
Yeah,
obvious. Yeah, but the kids, you can see how kids would think, "Holy shit, the video game did
yeah,
something to him," or
yeah. That specific game was at fault.
yeah, or they see servicemen come in, do diagnostics.
Yeah.
They would run diagnostics, but they don't know what that is. So they would think, oh, is this, that's what does the special function do? Is that like brainwashing function? Like what?
Mhm.
The imagination runs wild, and so like you can see how people who were kids back then could kind of you know they hear the legend and then they can kind of they remember these somewhat odd things from the perspective of a child, and they go, "Oh, that must have been Polybius, right? That must have
Mhm.
been the Men in Black." You know, um, and so it becomes kind of believable and it becomes kind of real in that way. And I think it's going back to what we were talking about earlier with the internet and the blurring of reality and fiction. That's something that even 20 years ago the internet was doing with Polybius being the perfect example, right? It was this story through the internet was it essentially reshaped some people's reality and their
Yeah.
perception of their own past to make them go, oh well, maybe that was Polybius I saw, you know.
Yeah, it connected some dots and and at the time already 20-plus-year-old memories of
Yeah, exactly.
just like, oh yeah, like some of these people like in their 30s or 40s saying this, like, oh yeah, I remember, when I was 10 in an arcade, like
Yeah, exactly.
playing these games, and that stuff happening. And it's just like, obviously your brain doesn't, some memories would be foggy, but then someone says something that kind of lines up, and your brain is just like, ah, yes, of course, yes, you're right, that's exactly what it was.
Yep, exactly. So I think again with regards to what we were talking about earlier, I think I mean if an early internet urban legend, if a story from the early internet, from a like arcade cabinet index website, from like 2000 can have this kind of effect. I mean, think about the stuff, we talk about the breakdown of reality, how people can't handle, this space the internet puts us in. I mean, think about what advancements in AI technology are going to do, if not already doing, right? Like
Yeah, the consequences
blur
of that is
between
insane.
exactly the blur between reality and fiction is the barrier is just even more destroyed, basically, and it's going to get more destroyed as time goes on and as these things get better.
Yeah.
Um, and so it almost makes me want to wonder, like, what's the next Polybius going to be? What's the next? What's the next Polybius going to be, and how is it? how is it gonna be, I guess.
Yeah,
Like how is the modern state of the internet and technology going to color the next Polybius? How is it? What's the form it's gonna take, right?
right, yeah,
Um, so it's interesting. It's interesting to me how, because a story like Polybius like really could have only happened in the early aughts, right?
yeah,
Arcade cabinets were retro, but they weren't like super old yet.
yeah. It wasn't
Again,
totally
like
gone. It wasn't like,
exactly, I can still
now.
go to pizza shops and laundromats and play arcade games.
Yeah, or
They were
the
something
odd
that
bowling
were,
alley or things like that that still had that
yeah,
remnant of
yeah,
an aesthetic.
exactly. They still were around. They just weren't as prevalent, right?
Mhm.
It had been only 20 years since the 80s, since the start of the 80s at least. Um, so that's one of those things that's just really interesting to me, right? Because the best way to describe how our arcade games and our arcade cabinets kind of felt back in the early aughts, as a kid at least. I get it almost, if the 80s are like the heyday of arcades and arcade cabinets and arcade games, that would be the equivalent of like the Roman Empire. And then the aughts were like the Roman Empire had long fallen, but there was still like, there were still the remnants,
Yeah,
right? There was still the obvious remnants. And that's kind of what living in the aughts was like for arcades and arcade games, right? You could still see the remnants of the heyday at the laundromat, at the pizza place, at the bowling alley.
yeah.
Um,
And that
and
was
but
just everywhere too, because not even arcades, because like, oh, any nostalgic memories of like a blockbuster or like little things like that
oh yeah.
of just,
So now I'm wondering if, we're like 20 years from, well, Blockbuster kind of had a longer heyday and was around longer, I think.
yeah,
But like I wonder, is like, I mean, and analog horror kind of indicates that like it's probably gonna be, if it's gonna be anything. I'm not saying there's a guaranteed we're gonna get this crazy like urban legend that really blurs the line between fiction and reality. I'm not saying that's a guarantee, but if it does happen, I think analog horror indicates that it's probably gonna be like some kind of like legendary VHS, like haunted VHS or whatever
yeah,
from
yeah.
like
So,
Blockbuster or something.
oh yeah, someone grabbed the last VHS tape off a Blockbuster shelf before they got phased out, and it was some
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
mysterious, mysterious thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Who knows? Who knows what it will be the exact details? But I feel like that would be it, right? It would
Yeah,
be some,
well, something on
you know,
our own memories of the comfy
yeah, exactly,
childhood adventures to
exactly.
rent movies and CRT
Or or
TVs and
or maybe it won't be that. Maybe it'll be, because we're also kind of getting pretty far now from the early days of the internet. That's why we're also seeing, digital horror
Mhm.
prop up. So what? Maybe it could be something like that. Maybe it could be a digital horror, but which would be interesting, right? An internet urban legend about the early internet itself
Yeah, that
would
would
be
be
interesting.
incredibly fitting too.
Yeah, yeah, it'd kind of be recursive, like a meta thing almost, right? Um, like a lot, especially with stuff like lost media, like being kind of popular now. Maybe it's like a lost website.
Yeah, yes. Oh, they found
Is
it like super far back and it only showed up for one day on like the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, yeah,
Never existed again. And
which again, it like Polybius would make it totally believable because that's stuff that actually like true and happens, right?
yeah,
Websites that just were around for not too long back in the day, and then they died, and maybe they got one or two archive screenshots. and that's it. That's totally believable. That's
Yeah,
happened all the time, right?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, there's all these aspects about the early internet that would make for a great urban legend like Polybius. So we'll see if that happens. We'll see
yeah.
if that becomes a thing.
Maybe we'll get to watch one in real time this time.
Yeah, that would be nice. Nice and interesting.
Yes, as long as
Um,
it's blurs the lines enough. It's important.
yeah, that is important. It's important because again, like we've said before, that's kind of where the real magic is. And I think we need that magic, right? As much as we're like society as a whole is kind of increasingly getting lost in the Chapel Perilous, I think stories and urban legends like Polybius are like the fact that we don't have a lot of those anymore. Like it's kind of tragic, right? Because
Yeah,
stories like that, I think, are something we kind of need, right? We kind
yeah,
of they're important aspect of a culture. Um,
yeah. Like yeah, all sorts of that stuff. Just yeah, urban legends, but and which tie into like folk heroes and all these like it all ties back again to I want to believe.
yes,
It's
yes,
just the different
bingo,
aspect of it of but again, it's just I want there to be more. I want there to be more than
exactly.
this or maybe even just retroactive like oh, so there was more like to, my childhood. Like there was more stuff going on. Like there was cool
Yeah,
stuff, there was spooky stuff. And it's just like, you know, change your memories of it a little bit and add some extra something, some
yeah.
substance.
Add some intrigue.
Intrigue. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I 100% get it. Yeah, and that's why I think it's important that, again, as much as I understand the trend, we need people to make these stories, make these legends. To because that really is the backbone to a healthy societal psyche.
Yeah.
Is how I'm choosing to phrase it.
Yeah. A bit of humanity's always needed a bit of whimsy in
Yeah.
its
Yes.
culture.
Yes.
There's a big
Take
need for that.
take the whimsy pill. If you get anything out of this episode, it's take the whimsy pill. And if you hear this episode and you agree, if you like, if you hear every word that we're saying, you're like based, so true, so real. Go out and make the legends, make the stories, make the next Polybius, or at
Yeah.
least try.
Yeah, and some of these things just it takes patience and time that, everyone
Yeah,
nowadays is seems to be struggling with a lot of these things, but like
yeah. Which that's
some of
that
these
might
it's
be a
like
topic for a whole other
oh yeah,
episode, but
that's yeah, a whole other thing, but regardless, like even if, some people get demotivated or don't think it's nothing's going to happen, blah blah, everything's oversaturated. Just plant some seeds. Just that simple.
Mhm.
Just even if it's just, some random little thread somewhere, some screenshot you post, and just let it rot somewhere on the internet for a long time, and you know, touch back on it many years, or other people will pick it up if whatever little ominous thing you posted was strange enough. Because some stuff just resurfaces every
Yeah,
now and again, and will just suddenly be this whole thing. So it's just like, yeah, if your little thing, whatever your little project doesn't take off, just be patient, see what happens, see if many years down the line you can send a link somewhere to something that leads some person on a little rabbit hole.
yep.
Let that cascade.
I completely agree. 100% agree. As the serpent consumes more and more of reality, we ironically lose. We're ironically losing a lot of the magic in the world, right?
Yeah,
Um, and I think it should be the duty of our generation to bring back some of that magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be a schizopunk is to be a wizard. You are a wizard. Go
Yes.
do some magic.
Yeah. Use your meme magic.
Yes. Which,
Haunted 2012 top text meme. There you go. There's your.
well, look, on that note, on the note of meme magic, which may, I don't know if it'll be the next episode, but that's a hint for a future episode that will actually have a lot to do with this episode thematically. Now that I think about it, in some ways, may even be a kind of culmination of the various themes we've been talking about in this episode and others, in regards to the breakdown of reality. Maybe not a culmination, but a
Yeah, because honestly, it is a yeah,
climax.
a bit of an endless topic there.
Yeah,
There's
I was gonna say not
so
a
much.
culmination, but I think it'll definitely be a climax
Yes, of
to this
course.
this through line. I think that'll about do it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's we. You know, like we said earlier, we're not here to rehash the whole Polybius story. There's yeah, plenty of fantastic videos that goes into the deep lore about
Yeah,
the actual thing. But you know, hey, here we're here to add our own
well,
little twist,
yeah,
our own little
the
view to
this episode was more about why Polybius is so important
yeah, yeah,
and still is still important to this day.
yeah, and why
So
you should go and make urban legends. Even though now
yes,
it'll
yes.
be referred to as something else, probably, you know, ARG or something, unfiction. But you know,
Well,
hey, if you
I think
can,
a good yeah a good ARG, a good unfiction story is basically just an urban legend.
yeah, exactly, yeah, pretty much,
Maybe we can come up with a new word for what is really being referred to with this concept of urban legend slash ARG slash unfiction slash whatever. Um, we'll cook up some new schizo lingo, but
yes, oh,
until then, you get what we're talking about.
exactly,
Hopefully. So, I think that'll be it for this episode of Layer One.
yes. Thank you, people, for tuning in.
Yeah, we'll see you
Bye.
later.
Peace.